Welcome to Spicy Toast Gaming and our tier list for the strongest champions. If you enjoy the video, please like and subscribe, and let's get into it. Starting off, we do have a criteria for what we're going to be using to rank the champions. So first, we have consistency. How consistent are they to be able to go in and clear out an adventure without dying, without having to use any revives, and just win time after time, regardless of what powers they get or how lucky they get in a certain match. So that's going to be the top priority. How good are they with their basic kit, their relics, and how much help do they actually need from powers in game? Next, we have speed. So unfortunately, in Runeterra, this is the main way they're increasing difficulty, but you do need to have champions that can clear pretty fast, because with like Aurelion Soul, they are just trying to overwhelm you as fast as possible, and so you need to be able to close out games fairly quickly. Next, we have versatility. How well can they respond to enemy threats or spells? So can they protect their own units? Can they get rid of enemy threats? Do they have multiple ways of winning the game built into their deck? Because with some champions, they only have really one way to win, and that's a major weakness. So these are the three things we're going to mainly be looking at for our champions and ranking them accordingly. Lastly, before we start actually ranking any of the champions, we do actually have every single champion in the game. We have them all over level 20. I believe our lowest is level 21. As you can see here, we have a lot of levels, and we have all of them at 3 stars other than these 5. Also, we've done a guide for every single champion, and part of that guide is going through and also defeating Galio. So everyone has at least been able to defeat Galio, and we've defeated Aurelion Soul on a good amount of them. So while you may disagree with some selections in the tier list, just know that we have actually spent a good amount of time playing each and every champion. All right, with that out of the way, let's jump in to the tier list. We will be doing the tier list in alphabetical order. So the first unit we have is Annie, and we are going to be giving Annie the A tier. She is very versatile, has a lot of control. With some builds, she can clear adventures incredibly quickly, and she's just in general a very strong champion. Up next, we have Ashe, and we're putting her in the B tier. She's pretty good. She does lack some ways to respond to enemy threats. The only real spell she has is Frostbite, so if that can't protect her units, then she doesn't really have any way to respond. Is still pretty good, very solid. Is a bit slow though. Winning games with her does generally drag on a bit long. Next we have Bard. We're putting Bard in the C tier. He's pretty good, but is rather slow, and the only spells he has are for 5 and 6 mana. 6 mana, the mini morph, it does have that double time watch, so it can tick down, and you might be able to play it for cheaper, but feels really bad if you draw that and the enemy is targeting one of your units, going to kill Bard or another strong unit of yours, and you just have no way to protect them. So Bard does feel a little limiting and doesn't really have good ways to respond to many enemy threats. Next we have Darius. We're going to put Darius in the B tier. He's just full offense, has no way to defend his units other than killing the enemy. So that can work out sometimes, but his units are fairly weak. So you really can struggle in some games where your units are going to be getting rid of, taken care of. Like if you're going up against a Viego and he's just using all of his kill spells to delete all your units, you really don't have a good way to defend yourself. And so he can be a little bit more inconsistent than some of the champions in the A or S tier. Up next, speaking of S tier, we have Diana. Diana, incredibly strong. She is probably the best champion for ending the game in a single round. I think she's better at that than anyone else in the game. Very, very strong, very aggressive, and yeah, just OTKs enemies throughout the entire match. Like, I've had matches where I've had 5 or 6 battles in a row where she just ends the game as soon as I play her. And the fact that she can do that consistently, and it's not just when you get lucky, is pretty crazy, and she definitely belongs in the S tier. Next up, we have Evelynn. So we're putting Evelynn in the A tier. She has a massive amount of control and removal with Evelynn herself and the relics you can put on her, because she's able to trigger all those level up relics many different times, up to technically 6, but you're probably more likely to get around 3 to 4. But Evelynn, very strong. She does lack removal outside of Evelynn herself with certain spells, and she doesn't really have any ways to protect her units. So you can struggle a little bit, but in general, she is quite strong. Next, we have Garen. Garen has everything, ways to protect his units, removal every single round, very strong units. He's very consistent and really can handle just about anything you throw at him. Next, we have Gnar. Gnar is very fun to play, a very unique playstyle of trying to hit the enemy nexus every single round. He is rather difficult, though, and some of his units can feel a bit weak. You definitely need to get a good amount of levels on him, and then you really have to think while you're playing him more than a lot of other champions, planning ahead and strategically getting those nexus hits every single round to stack up your board. And then you also are trying to protect your units, because if any of them die, you're then losing those impact stats, and he's just a lot more inconsistent than most other champions. But he is quite fun to play, at least in my opinion. Next, we have Gwen. Gwen, I feel like, putting her in the S tier, I feel like she is the best made deck in Path of Champions. She is pretty much everything: sustain, draw, ways to respond to just about any enemy spell. She has units that are easily replaceable, with most of them being hallowed. You're totally fine with them dying. And then Gwen herself, you play her at turn 4 and she ends the game very consistently. So one of my favorite champions, but just looking at her deck, I feel like it's the best made deck in Path of Champions. Up next, we have Alawi. Alawi feels very similar to Gwen in the fact that you play her on turn 4, and most of the time you're going to end the game right there. The major problem with Alawi, though, is that everything is built around the tentacle. So if that tentacle gets frostbitten or killed or something like that, you have to start your stacks over again. Now, when you have Alawi at 3 stars, you can build it up pretty quickly, so it's not that big of a deal, but it is a pretty large weakness, and so that's why she's sitting down in the A tier and not up in the S tier like Gwen. She does have a lot of spells, though, that can help mitigate whatever the enemy's throwing at you, and is a pretty well-made deck as well. Jax, we're putting Jax in the S tier. Much like Diana, he is very consistent with ending the game in the first 2 rounds. Very strong, very aggressive. Because of how fast he is, you really don't need to worry about most enemy threats, because you've already won before they can really do anything. So this is just massive power and speed that's overcoming really any weaknesses he would have. So if you want a champion like Diana that you can end games at the very start of the game and just be pushing as fast as possible, Jax is another one that's just almost uncontested in that realm. Next, we're going to take a look at Jhin. Jhin has a massive amount of control and removal, constantly generating these spells that'll either stun or deal 3 damage to enemy units. He also has a very good wombo combo of playing him with Riptide Battery, every single one of those going off, counting as a skill, leveling him up, getting him a bunch of stacks as far as health and power, and just really helping you end the game right there. He does take a lot of preparation, or you having to think a lot more and plan. He's probably one of the most difficult champions to play as far as having to keep track of a lot of different elements, but he is very good once you get used to playing him. Definitely in the A tier. Next up, we have Jinx. We all have Jinx. We all play Jinx. We all know how good she is. The fact that just playing your cards in any way is both giving you removal and damage on the enemy nexus. And then when you play her for 4 mana, most times she's just going to end the game right there. There's a lot of different ways you can build her with relics, but very easy to play, almost mindless essentially, and she's going to end the game without a problem. Kai'Sa, putting Kai'Sa down in the B tier. She's a lot of fun, but she does have an issue where she can't really respond to enemy threats or enemy spells. She doesn't really have any way to protect her units other than trying to get Spell Shield on them. That's really all she can do. And then her removal is pretty weak. Before you're evolved, it can only target followers. So you're playing against something like a Zoe. They put Zoe on the field, and you can't even target your one removal spell to get rid of her until you're evolved. And by that point, Zoe's probably too buffed up to really care. So Kai'Sa is a lot of fun, but you can struggle with just responding to what the enemy throws at you, and that can be quite frustrating. So that's why she's down in the B tier. Up next, we have Kayn. Very much a similar boat as far as not just having a well-built deck that can really respond to what the enemy throws at you. Quite often they will target your units with some sort of spell, potentially a kill spell, and you just have to stop and let it happen. There's nothing you can do. With Kayn, it's also very frustrating because normally you just have a couple units that you're really trying to stack up, and then the enemy targets you with something and there's just nothing you can do. Feels pretty bad. You don't have any response, but Kayn is very strong, getting some nice big units, so as long as they don't target one of your weaknesses, you'll be very good, having good sustain, but he does have some problems with that inconsistency. Next, we have Lee Sin. Lee Sin, very inconsistent in my opinion, has a lot of mana issues, and you're really reliant on what powers you get in-game. Because of how expensive you are, your relics can only help you so much, and even though you might have the best possible games on Lee Sin and feel absolutely unstoppable, there'll be another game where you just don't get any good powers and you feel completely miserable. Because of that inconsistency, we're putting him down in that C tier. Up next, we have Leona. Leona's going in the B tier. She's a bit slow, has a very powerful amount of control, but all of her spells go slow. So she can't respond to whatever the enemy's doing because all of her spells being slow, nothing you can really do. But as long as you're able to plan ahead and take care of enemy threats before they're able to respond, so using your slow spells before they're actually attacking or whatnot, can be quite good. And then the amount of stunning you can do, so stunning the entire enemy board every single round, very nice, but she is a bit inconsistent, which is why she's down in the B tier. Next we have Lux, and we're going to be putting Lux in the A tier. Very good, very strong combo that's pretty much unstoppable. Right around when you get 5 mana, you're able to stack up a couple rallies, buff up your whole board, and just be attacking 3 to 4 times in a single round, absolutely destroying the enemy. Does take a bit of forethought, but is pretty strong. You do have some barriers to try to protect your units. You don't have the best removal, but normally with all of your attacking units over and over again, you're able to get that taken care of. So Lux, very powerful, a little bit on the slower side, but incredibly consistent, and you're always confident you're going to be able to win your game with Lux. Next, Master Yi, and we're going to put him in the A tier. So very strong. He's able to respond to just about any enemy spell being able to buff his units up both with health and damage to massive levels. The only thing you can't really protect yourself from is those kill spells, since you don't have too many ways to either recall your units or give them spell shield. But very fast, you can normally end the game pretty quickly with Master Yi, especially if you throw on like a Crown Guard Inheritance. You can buff your Yi up to a massive amount, attack, level him up, attack again, and end the game. So very strong, and essentially the champion that Lee Sin wishes he was, is how it feels like. So yeah, very good, very solid champion. He definitely belongs in the A tier. We have Miss Fortune, also going to put her in the A tier. She is the perfect swarm deck, getting a bunch of units, attacking. Every time you attack, you're drawing more units. You have a lot of removal, and then you don't have ways to protect your units, but that doesn't really matter because you don't care if they die. The only unit you really care about is Miss Fortune, and if you want, you can throw a spell shield on her with relics. She is able to run down games very quickly, not as fast as or consistent as those in the S tier, but normally she's just a couple rounds behind them. So if you like big swarmy boards and just attacking with a full board every time, Miss Fortune is definitely a champion for you. Next we have Ornn. Ornn is going to be our first D tier champion. So he's quite slow, and he essentially has no spells. The only spell he has is Catalyst of Aeons, which heals your Nexus a little bit and gives you an extra mana gem. So you have no ways to remove enemy threats other than just attacking and hoping that they block or trying to get Challenger. And you have no ways to protect your units. So it's already a slow deck, and then it can be quite inconsistent, and you really don't have options to deal with a lot of what the enemy throws at you, other than just trying to buff your units up. Now, I love Ornn. He is stylistically like my favorite champion. If you've noticed in game, I actually have my in-game icon being Ornn, but unfortunately, he's just not in a good place right now. Hopefully, he can get some buffs, slightly changing his star powers, and we can see him do a bit better. Up next, we have Tahm Kench. I want to put Tahm Kench in the B tier. One of my favorite champions, my favorite champion of actually the previous version of Path of Champions. He's a lot of fun. I love how he can duplicate units. He is a bit on the slower side, though, where you're not really able to just storm down and end the game pretty quickly. You have to be a little bit more slow and methodical, using Tahm Kench to capture all the enemy units. So with him on the board, you have great removal, and your units are pretty strong, and you have that health pot to try to heal them. So you have good ways to respond to the enemy, but you really just are a bit slower, but you are quite consistent. Next, we have Talia. Talia is also going to be in the B tier, our one and only landmark champion at the moment. Very nice, very strong, but the issue is those landmarks. So you're going to have some times where you have a bunch of landmarks on the board and you're ready for them to count down, and you're going to destroy the enemy when they're done, but sometimes they'll attack and you only have 2 or 3 blockers, and you can't play any other cards, because if you do, you're going to be getting rid of one of your landmarks, which you don't want to do, because then you're screwing yourself over in a turn or two. So there are some issues with those landmarks taking up space on your board, and you're just feeling like you have all this mana, you have cards to play, but you just feel like there's nothing you really can do. Also, you don't have any removal. You do have ways to give enemies vulnerable, so you can try to challenge them and kill them, but that's really your only way to target enemies to get rid of them. So that is a bit of a weakness there. But in general, pretty fun board, or pretty fun deck, and fairly consistent, but does have some issues. Next we have Teemo. Teemo, obviously, in the S tier. Once you get Teemo leveled up, he absolutely destroys. He's able to consistently end the game within the first couple rounds. Normally a bit slower than Diana or Jax because you have to wait for them to actually draw their cards to get annihilated by all the puff caps. But normally within the first couple rounds, Teemo can absolutely demolish the enemy nexus and put so many puff caps in there that they can't do anything. So Teemo, very, very strong, a lot of fun to play, and even though you normally think of him as being a more of a ramp deck with you stacking up these puff caps, you can do it at such an insane level that, in the first couple rounds you win. Next we have Varus. So we're going to be putting Varus in the A tier. Very, very strong. The fact that you can duplicate spells in your deck, reduce their cost, and create copies of them. Really good. Copying spells onto your units or being able to double their effects on one of your units. Very nice. He does have a bit of an issue with constantly drawing your Furious Wielder and not being able to use it because none of your units are equipped. Bit of a problem, but there are ways to mitigate that. Very strong, very consistent. Varus himself ends the game pretty much the turn you play him. So in general, strong, fast, and consistent. We have Vayne up next. Vayne is also going to go in that A tier. Very consistent. She can end the game very quickly with her attacking 2 to 3 times every single round. She is a bit slower than those in the S tier, but is still pretty good. She does struggle with responding to some enemy threats. Most of her spells are either slow or they're too expensive unless you've attacked 2 times that round already. So some of your units can be deleted. You don't really have the best ways to protect them at times. But in general, it's a pretty well-made deck and pretty consistent, very powerful, but not quite enough to move up into that S tier in my opinion. All right, up next is Veigar, one of my favorite champions. Sadly, he's in this C tier. So, very strong, tons of removal, but he is rather slow. You can try to mitigate that with putting the Scourge's stash on Veigar, trying to get him out turn 1, letting him start stacking up and getting that ramp going. But he is a ramp deck, and you're trying to use those darkness to destroy the enemy nexus, but that does take time, and against some of the tougher opponents, like Aurelion Sol, that can be quite difficult. It makes him a bit more inconsistent than a lot of the other champions. He is tons of fun, though, but yeah, unfortunately just on the weaker side compared to other champions. Up next, we have Vi. So we're going to put Vi in the B tier. She can be quite strong, but is a bit inconsistent with having to rely on stacking buffs. So both stacking the buffs onto Vi herself to get her up to that 10 power, and then also the stacking impact buff. So quite often, you'll have one unit that's getting all this health and impact, and then they get taken out by an enemy spell that you can't stop, and then your buffs are now essentially back down to 0. So it's kind of the same issue that Alawi has, except you can't stack it up as fast. When Alawi's tentacle gets taken care of, normally you can get enough spawns back that you can build up a decent one and still end the game. With a Vi, the fact that it's just round start for the impact, really don't have a way to speed that up. For Vi herself, that stacking, you can get it done fairly quickly, but it also relies you having Vi in hand at the start of the game. So if you have bad luck and you just don't draw her, then you're really screwed. So she's quite powerful, but she does have a bit more inconsistency than most of the champions that are up in that A and S tier. Next we have Yasuo. Yasuo is going to go in the A tier. Yasuo has a lot of the same playstyle as like Ashe. He's just better. So Ashe, you frostbite a unit every single round. great. They are now frostbitten, but Yasuo stunning the unit, that means they can't do anything. If they're frostbitten, they can still block, they can still try to attack, unless you have Ashe herself leveled up, making it so they can't block. But just because they're frostbitten, they can still get buffed up. They can still then attack. Whereas if they're stunned, they can't do anything. So stunning itself is just stronger than frostbiting. Also, with Yasuo on the board, that stun each round is essentially a removal, because Yasuo will just kill the unit. And then Yasuo himself is able to just have a very strong combo of putting his one relic on, where he'll stun the whole board when he levels up. So you play Yasuo, he stuns everyone, kills them all, scales to a massive amount, and you win the game. Ashe really doesn't have that same effect. So yeah, he essentially feels same playstyle sort of as Ashe, just better in like every way. He's very consistent and very strong, so he's in our A tier there. Next and last, we have Yuumi. So Yuumi, I bet no one's going to be surprised. She's going to join Ornn in the D tier. She can be very strong in the early game, rushing down the enemy before they can really have strong enough units to defeat you, but you don't really have any way to protect your units, and you have very poor removal, with it being mini-morph at 4 mana. So if you're not able to end the game quickly and it goes on longer, you feel very weak with no real way to respond to enemy threats. And so it's a really slow deck. If you don't win quickly, you're probably not going to win quite often, and you just don't feel like you have any options for what the enemy is doing. So feels pretty bad. Hopefully she can get some changes later, but right now she's, I think, one of the worst, if not the worst deck in Path of Champions. So she is going in our D tier. We didn't put anyone in our F tier because we didn't think anyone really deserved to be that low. Even if some of these champions are rated a bit lower, every single champion can beat anything in the game. They all can go and defeat Aurelion Sol. That being said, you're going to have a much harder time with some of them than others. But they're all good to play. They all have a unique play style. So I like all the champions. Happy that they're all there. Some are just weaker than others. I hope you guys enjoyed this tier list. Definitely comment down below what you think, what selections you would have moved around. Hope you guys have a great day. Please like and subscribe, and I'll see you later. Hey, you made it to the end of the video. Thank you so much for watching that video all the way to the end. If you did enjoy it, please like and subscribe. We're putting out multiple videos every single day for Path of Champions content. So if that interests you, subscribe, hit that notification bell, and welcome to the channel. Have a great day.